What is going on, y'all? KMBest here. Let's take a look at the best decks to climb in Marvel Snap. I think this metagame is fairly balanced in terms of there are multiple decks that I could reasonably have put at the top of this list, and there are plenty of decks that are competitive with the decks that I'm putting at the top of this list, but I do think there is a fairly clear tier 1 for me, and it starts with Scream, who is just a classically excellent card. It is very hard to look at this deck and say that there is a single thing wrong with it. This is just a deck that has an excessive amount of good cards, great scalers, the ability to interact, and what it lacks in actual hard tech cards, it makes up for in the fact that it is very, very able to disrupt its opponents with the ability to move things around. This is a very relevant ability that Scream really ties into. I don't want to oversell it. The deck definitely wouldn't exist without Scream, who is a scaler that scales +4 every time you make her happen. The card is legitimately excellent. The deck does exist because of her, but it's not just her. It's the supporting cast of Sam Wilson and Kraven and all of the other excellent cards like Cannonball and Arrow that can lock out lanes on the final turn of the game or punish your opponent for doing so. This is a deck that has a great mixture of interaction and power, but it lacks hard tech. So you can have bad matchups against things that require a hard tech piece in order for you to go over the top of them. The good news is you are an excellent mid-range deck, and this metagame is fairly mid-range focused, and so you end up in a very good spot against a wide variety of those lists. A brief discussion of Alt Scream here. This is the heavily teched out version. You have plenty of tech for whatever it is that you run into here. You have a Killmonger. You have the ability to blow up all the Thanos stones out of the ongoing Thanos deck. You have things like Lady Deathstrike, which can answer a bullseye. This is a deck that is minimizing the investment in Scream herself and maximizing the fact that if you have a backbone or a core as strong as Scream, Sam, and Kraven, you're going to be able to just run a bunch of tech cards and it'll be fine. This is a less cohesive deck that is much more customized to the metagame, and the only reason I think it's fallen off a little bit is that the release of Infinity Ultron really muddied the waters in terms of what the metagame actually was. This is a deck that is better in a predicted metagame when you can customize the tech to it. It's still a little bit up in the air right now. I agonized over what Ajax deck to start with here. I think it is very clear to me that an Ajax deck is among the best decks in the game. I think you could even argue that all of the Ajax decks we're about to talk about are among the best decks in the game, but it's worth understanding the differences between them because those minute differences are going to be the things you run up against when you play against them. This is the explosive all-in Ajax list, which after a bit of research and some conversations, I found out was brought back to prominence by a player named Cougar after he watched one of my old tier lists where I played something like it 6 months ago. So shout out to Cougar. This is the list that has been running around High Infinite recently. One of the things that I think is sort of a hidden upside of this is that, yes, you are losing out on stuff by not having the full package here, but I really do think it's kind of impossible to overstate how good it is that you get to be a Sam Wilson deck. This is a deck that gets to be a Sam Wilson deck where none of the other versions of this deck do. Classic Ajax hits at a sort of different rate. There is a notable thing that has happened, which is the increase in play of Rocket and Groot has made just playing your own Luke Cage worthwhile. The increase in play of the version of the deck that we just saw has made playing your own Luke Cage worthwhile. The increase in play of Scream has made playing your own Luke Cage worthwhile. So there is a lot to be said about this. But what really happens with this deck, and the thing that really holds it back, is Zabu reliance. This is a deck that fundamentally is not built as well as some of the other builds here, and because of that, when it hits the Zabu, it's a massive spike in terms of how usable and playable the list is, and then when it doesn't hit the Zabu, you're staring at these 4s and these 5s in your hand, and you're trying to figure out how the hell you're supposed to win any game. The power is still here. This is a deck list that I think has more power in theory than it does in practice because of how many cards get stranded in your hand, but it is undeniably strong. I tried hybridizing the lists with some success. The idea here is basically I want to play my own loot cage for if we run into mirrors, and then otherwise I can still be the better constructed version. The problem is we have the same problem. There's just so many fours here. Like, it is just, I honestly wonder if a better solution to the thing that I'm talking about would just be putting Loot Cage in the other deck. Like, it just might just be the time to do that at this point. Just know that these decks are extremely powerful. The first is fragile, but not clunky. These two are clunky, but they're not fragile, and they're just extremely consistent point output decks that are going to be able to compete with the vast majority of things in Marvel Snap. Goliath Thanos is, I think, a deck that people are not necessarily forgetting about, but it is a deck that is quite powerful right now. I think it is definitely among the best decks in the game. It's been one of the most successful decks for me this season, and that goes back to, like, the beginning of the season when this card first came out, Goliath, and even up to today, the day that I'm filming this. I was playing it just before this. It's just straight up good. The only new addition you'll notice here is that instead of Super Scroll, there is a Kahori. She is just generally pretty good in Thanos. That's like a 4/11 distributed across multiple lanes a lot of the time. That seems to be like her average output when I play her. She's only very rarely been smaller than that, and even at her smallest, it's like, oh, that's a 4/9. You're very okay with that. It's not like a thing you love, but that's her floor, effectively. Now, the reason I like her in this list, and in Thanos lists generally, but especially those that are built like this with Spectrum and Blue Marvel and things like that, is that she enables you to, much like Spectrum and Blue Marvel, surprise your opponent by adding power to side lanes. And since so many people are expecting Spectrum Blue Marvel at this point, Kahori can mess with those expectations a little bit. You're just generally pretty happy to add power to side lanes while playing a reasonable body. That's kind of the ethos of this deck in the first place, and she definitely fits that. Other than that, the deck is very straightforward. One advantage it does get is I have noticed a pretty large uptick in the amount of decks that are willing to play Magic between Clog and Mr. Negative coming back into the metagame. This is a deck that has a built-in answer to that kind of stuff in the form of Infinity Stone, and although Clog is not a great matchup for you because of the way in which you are very susceptible to being clogged, you are also still good enough at putting power into the other locations, even after they have been closed off, that it is almost sometimes an actual good game of Marvel Snap, which a lot of decks that are weak to Clog cannot say. I had to convince myself not to open the video with Clog because I think it is perhaps the deck that maybe defines this metagame the most. Clog is an immense presence in this metagame that sort of looms large over what is and is not allowed and makes sure that things don't get a little bit too crazy. It has that reasonably good matchup into Thanos. It is pretty damn solid into a lot of stuff, but there are enough Sam Wilsons and Rocket and Groots around that it's not a guaranteed win the same way it normally is against a bunch of stuff. So the good news is that if you can clog someone, Cannonball is basically an unbeatable card. That's great news. The bad news is that it does get a little bit harder to clog people, and a lot of why we're playing Enchantress in this list is so that we can shut down those Sam Wilsons when people are relying on them. Predicting Sam Wilson moves is going to win you a lot of cubes with this list, and it adds a genuine cube equity card into here. Between Enchantress and the other stuff we can force, this is a deck that maybe requires the most amount of reads in Marvel Snap, because if you don't read things correctly, you are not going to win too many cubes, and if you snap after reading things correctly, you're winning one at a time. Next up is Silver Surfer, which is a deck that finds itself in flux. Last week I speculated about the potential of including Killmonger, but I do think that the general incidence of Thanos has dropped fairly precipitously recently, despite the fact that I still think it's very good. It's the play rate of the deck that makes it worth teching against, and that play rate has dropped a decent amount. Now, this is still a very powerful list, even without having a card that is a free win against some percent of the metagame, but this is also a list that has a sort of inherent cap on it. It's definitely strong enough to be good, and I genuinely believe that Silver Surfer is good, bordering on great. It's a powerful list that is proven at all levels. What it lacks is ceiling. This is a deck that does not have a very high ceiling. And because of that, you are very often making high level decisions about abandoning lanes, targeting one lane specifically. What is my opponent going to play? What are the chances that they do X, Y, and Z? This is a deck that asks a lot from you because it doesn't give you a lot to work with. It's a similar profile to the all-in Scream deck that we talked about earlier, where you are not necessarily going to have the most points ever. So you have to be smart about where those points are. Mr. Negative has been roaring back into style, much as I predicted at the end of last tier list. There is an open space in this metagame for anyone who can just like combo deck stuff and bully people out of there. When you're playing against Scream, when you're playing against Thanos, when you're playing against like a lot of these decks and you have, Ravona into Mr. Negative, you can just be like, oh yeah, I win. There are not a lot of location changers in the most popular mid-range decks, which means it's even safer for you to do this than it is normally. Obviously, that can change, and you are vulnerable to those rug pulls. But generally speaking, Mr. Negative is just a deck where if you have the stuff, you snap it, they are out of there. They are gone. And you do have more of an ability to limp into games than other versions of Mr. Negative have. Between like the Wong stuff that can be possible, you have the ability to make a giant Sage and then Taskmaster it, stuff like that. There are a couple other versions floating around. I've played against a version that is running Shang-Chi, Killmonger, and of course Super Skrull. I suspect it's also running Null, but I didn't get to see enough cards. But I played against that version several times. I think that's a very viable thing to do. I just don't know if it's exactly what I want to be doing right now because of the way this deck is positioned. I'd rather be limping into Thanos matchups with Gore stuff than with Killmonger, but there is some cube equity there. Like, that is definitely an unexpected way you can adapt to this metagame if you feel the need to do so. It's a powerful list, and most of what you're going to be doing with Mr. Negative is going for, oh, I did the thing, you lose, and most of the time that's going to be true. I agonized over how to talk about this deck because I still think it's not amazing. And I've seen some recent other versions of Discard with like Khonshu and No Swarm, and I've tried them, and frankly, they do feel worse than this. But I feel as though Discard might have finally come, not necessarily to the end of its rope, but it's just like at a point where everyone is so clear on what's happening that there's not really a ton of upside in playing it instead of one of the other decks that can do points. This is a deck that is powerful. Like, it can bully some of the decks that don't necessarily have a lot of good ways to interact with it. This is a deck that can absolutely like bully a Scream deck, for example. It can do that. It has that ability. And I think a lot of people look at Discard, and when they see a deck that can bully a Scream deck, they're like, that must be OP. Except like the other like 50% of the time, it just doesn't draw well enough to compete. And so there's this deck that this deck I feel like is the most hypothetically unbeatable deck in the world. In a hypothetical matchup where this deck draws well, nothing other than Mr. Negative is going to beat it. Nothing other than going over the top is going to beat it. But in practice, it's vulnerable to a wide variety of tech cards. Enchantress hits a Morbius. You have the Red Guardian on any number of things. Dakin is actually the least vulnerable of all of your threats because all of his points are located in your hand most of the time. But like even a Gorgon on the Dakin blades will make it so Bullseye can't discard them. There's just a bunch of weird stuff that all adds up to just random losses that you pick up here and there, and those are very unpleasant to deal with. So while this deck is uniquely powerful in the sense that there is no card that destroys it the way a Mobius and Mobius does for a Mr. Negative, it is also uniquely weak to a variety of things. Like, This is a deck that Thanos can beat with like Cosmo predictions and things like that. Like, it's just kind of a deck that can lose to a bunch of different and weird things, despite the fact that it has an inherently large amount of points. The Thena deck is just good. I think we're about to enter our It's the Juggernaut section of the metagame report here. This is a deck that, yes, it is a Sam Wilson Juggernaut deck. You don't need to have Sam Wilson for this. You can play US Agent instead. For much of my testing with this list, I did play US Agent instead before realizing Sam Wilson was just going to be better most of the time. This is a powerful list that uses its scalars in dangerous ways to create large powered boards without a lot of energy expenditure. It combines these large powered boards with Cosmo and Juggernaut to prevent meaningful interaction against them. This is a deck that struggles with things that have scalars of their own that scale even higher. So for example, if you're not predict Cosmoing a MODOK against the discard deck, they're very often able to just simply go taller than you. That can be a definite problem. What this list does do, and it does it very well, is play interactive, quick, and low to the ground with powerful tech options at the top end. Your scalars are important. Thena and Havoc are going to be the main reasons why you win lanes. But outside of that, you also have Agent Venom, who almost plays as a scalar in the sense that you play him early and he pays you off for doing so by making more points. And on a 2/5 body, there is really not much more you can ask for. Good scalars, good interaction, good cards, good deck. Similar concept here. We have, once again, your scalars in the form of Surtur, and I know this is a little bit of a, like, it's not really technically a scalar, but like, Sauron sort of plays as one in much the same way that Agent Venom does in the previous list. This is, of course, a deck that is very weak to Shang-Chi, but one thing I think you might notice if you've been watching so far is that Shang-Chi has probably never been less played, and there are a few reasons for this, but one of the proximate ones, I think, is that when you look at a Scream deck, there's basically 0 targets. When you look at a Thanos deck, Thanos is a target, but also not if they have the Soul Stone. And so you have multiple decks at the top end that are just like not really interested in, or don't really care about getting Shang-Chi'd. It's interesting. Like, we've just left a period of the metagame where he was in like 50% of decks, and now I don't want to overstate how few he's in. I feel like he's probably still in like 25%, but that's a pretty meaningful reduction when nothing actually changed about him, and the only thing that changed is the context around him. Now, all of that is to say that if you get Shang-Chi, you are still super sad about this list, but one of the other things you'll notice about this is that you are hitting so many Areses right now. There are so few decks that are like meaningfully going to be able to do something about your Ares. Like, this is just always going to be a 4/12 right now. That's a really powerful thing to have just in your back pocket, being able to just curve from like Sauron into a 3/10, into a 4/12, into a 5/14, into a 1-cost 12 power guy plus some interaction. I mean, you really can't ask for more than that. I'm gonna take a brief break from talking about 75 Juggernaut mid-range decks to discuss Move Bounce right now. I know that there are going to be people who are like looking at the top 10% stats on Untapped and they're like, wow, Move Bounce must be really good right now. I am not the biggest truster of the Move Bounce stats on Untapped when you're looking at the exact list Sizer is playing, in part because he is going to be a large portion of those stats. And so that makes it a little bit unreliable to look at, but there is a non-zero renaissance in this deck, and it is because of this list. I do like the Sage inclusion because it allows you to play in those small ball games where you're just like, oh, a Sage will actually win this game. There are plenty of other decks that are willing to say, this Sage is going to win this lane. You are very happy to be one. I've talked about what should be in the last slot here a lot. We've gone through like Hulkbusters and various other things in that spot. Sage is the happiest I've been with anything there. Moving on to several honorable mentions, here is the only deck in which I think Infinity Ultron might be a legit upgrade. This is from Denish. This is a very interesting change to the previous iteration of the list. Of course, you're probably familiar with how this list plays. There's one major thing that got added though, and it's that Infinity Ultron adds a lot of weirdness into the deck, but the main thing it adds that you're really compelled by is the fact that you can double on reveals, a very, very unique ability that this deck makes incredible use of. There's also a stone that pulls a card from your hand, which this deck has a ton of big cards in hand a lot of the time. In addition to that, there's just the basic Infinity Ultron stuff where you're happy to have a card that you can play on turn 4 because you played Cull Obsidian, or not Cull Obsidian, Corvus Glaive, and then you get to just do things, right? We've talked about Infinity Ultron ad nauseum, and the main conclusion being drawn is if he's not being played super early, he's not particularly worth looking at. Now, this is a deck that actually can play him super early. You get him out on turn 5, and it has additional uses for the stones, so it's not just the 2 good stones, the double and the clone. You have maybe 4 good stones. You have the ability to do a bunch of cool stuff with this list. Some of the interesting play patterns that I've run into are things like having discarded some cards that discard, playing out the Mind Stone, and then Helaing on the Mind Stone, so it brings back the cards in the first round of Hela, they discard further cards, and then Hela goes off again. Stuff like that is just unique, it's powerful, there's just a bunch that can be done, and the range is wide and unexpected because who honestly plays around that? This is the other major Infinity Ultron list in my opinion. I still think he probably makes it a little bit worse than Kahori does. Like, I think they're not as far apart as I originally thought, but I'm just not super sold on it. What is good about this list is the everything else. The V-Hand Frigga stuff is extremely, extremely powerful, and the only reason this is down here with the honorable mentions is the inclusion of Infinity Ultron, which I fundamentally just don't trust. But I do think that as people sort of grow in this matchup and start realizing, like, hey, maybe I don't want to ever play Infinity Ultron, this is a shell that is extremely powerful. This is just baseline an excellent shell, and I think just one thing to keep in mind for the future is that the V-Hand shell is one of the best decks to play in a world where Shadow King is an important card because it doesn't contain green power scalers. It contains a lot of ongoing scalers, which uniquely positions it among the shells in this metagame. Like when you look at a Scream deck or the Thena deck, like these are cards that care about the green power their own cards get. This is a deck that is much more easily synergistic in a world where Shadow King becomes more relevant. I'm not saying that's like a thing that matters, but it's worth pointing out that there is like a reason for this deck to exist beyond just being a pretty good deck with good points in it. Now, other downside here, though, is that you are extremely weak to Killmonger, and there definitely are people playing it. If you're looking for a nice, simple game of Marvel Snap, Good Machine is gonna do it. As usual, I only have one really important tip here, and it's stop blowing Ghost Spider. It's just not ever worth it. Ghost Spider is for A, Red Wing, B, so you can play a 6-drop and then move that 6-drop. A lot of your surprises on the final turn of the game are due to her. She is a very powerful card. This is a list that uses Blink in actually much the same way as the Denish Hela list, which allows it to exist in a similar space. We are in a fairly small metagame right now in the sense that, like, you know, it's likely that when you play the Infinite or get the Infinite onto the board, it's going to be the biggest thing in its own lane. That is a very decent spot for this list to be in. We are a little bit apprehensive of a couple matchups, like Thanos Zoo or Thanos Ongoing. That deck can actually just, like, outpower the Infinite pretty reasonably. Like, it's not the hardest thing in the world for them, honestly. That's a deck that's pretty good at getting, like, you know, 25, 25, 25 lanes. It's something. But there is a lot to be said for a deck like this. Couple tech-heavy points decks here. The first one is the classic shell for the Cook. I think this is a great spot to take a look at the potential for a Strange Supreme, something similar to this, relying on Mockingbird for points, relying on Sasquatch for points. accepting that Mysterio is just going to get eaten a lot, +2/+2/+2 on Strange Supreme. All of that stuff seems like an interesting starting point to me. I'm not sure Strange Supreme is going to land, but if it does, I'll be pretty surprised if it doesn't involve something that looks a lot like this. Normally, I talk about decks like this, and I call them like hater decks, but frankly, in a world where people are actually playing Clog, I don't even think this deck is that big of a hater. But it's a very reasonable thing to try to play. Just some Seraless Sera, get your Zabu down. It's one of those decks. You know those decks. Where it's just like, oh, I got a bunch of 4s, but sometimes my 4s cost 3, and then other times my 4s are going to cost 4, and then I'm really sad when they cost 4, but when they cost 3, I can play Shang Ench on the final turn of the game, and that's awesome. It's not bad. Like, there's nothing I can say that's, like, actively making these last 2 decks bad. It's just very pedestrian. I've been wondering how many times I can make this joke, but yeah, we're at the end of the tier list. It's Destroy, and I will say this for Destroy right now. Being a deck that naturally runs Killmonger is pretty good. It gives you a reasonable matchup into some Thanos stuff. It's not the end of the world, and you're also a deck that can actually scale pretty hard. Being a deck that scales pretty hard is also really good. I think we are in a metagame that is better for Destroy than many, if not all, of the metagames we've had in like the past year. Destroy might not be like the greatest deck in the world, but to me, it actually is a legitimately playable deck right now, mostly on the back of like, you know, Killmonger is pretty good, but also because we are able to scale Deadpool when we draw well in ways that like people just can't beat. Like, I think that people are so beaten down by Destroy having been bad for so long that they're now not snapping when they should with this deck. There are a lot of games where it's like, if you get a 32 Deadpool, you're not losing that game beyond like Invisible Woman Killmonger. Like, you're gonna actually dunk on them if that's what happens, right? And your good games are actually like really good. This deck is better than it has been in a very long time. All right, y'all. Thank you so much for watching. As always, please remember to like and subscribe. I still read all the comments, so if you leave one, I will read it. No guarantees on liking and responding, though. Make sure they're good, and I will see y'all in the next one. For the record, Lambie is going to be out for the next 2 weeks. I have 2 guest hosts lined up. I hope you enjoy them. Oh. People keep telling me to do this. I should do it. I have a podcast, the KMBest Podcast. It has a separate channel. That channel can be found in the description. If you like me, please click it. Watch the podcast. Listen to the podcast. It's also on Spotify. That podcast features Jerry Thompson, legendary Magic player, and one of my close friends. And we go over a bunch of Marvel Snap and, you know, sometimes non-Marvel Snap related things because I have a very bad case of unmedicated ADHD. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you. And I will see you in the next one.